Hi everyone. I am doing a a video screencast lecture um, on Module 5, and I wanted to talk about the assignments for this week. And we have another peer review, so we have another assignment that's going to slide into the next module week. So I wanted to just kind of make sure everybody's on board with what's expected for this week, and then as well as for the next module week, Module 6. So I'm just going to talk as briefly as possible. Sometimes my video lectures can go a little bit long, but so for this week, you were asked to read Chapter 8, and as I stated in my announcement, I did upload a PowerPoint for Chapter 8. So you want to read the chapter in the book, but then also the PowerPoints are nice because they kind of summarize some of the main ideas from the chapters. So this week, you went over the reading. You're also asked to read this scientific reviews and recommendations, which isn't specific to scientific writing, but it does talk about basically evaluation of sources and that sort of things. And so you want to read through that. That's not difficult reading to do. It's actually by Joe Moxley, who's one of my former professors. But you've got 3 assignments this week. You have a reflection, a discussion memo, and then you have the early draft of your technical report. So in the reflection, you are getting into evaluating sources because for your technical report, for the early draft, you are being asked to locate 3 sources and integrate those into your early draft. And then for your final, you're asked to integrate 6 sources. So you're getting into using sources and integrating them into your writing. So that's why you've got this assignment on evaluating sources, because you don't just want to use anything, and hopefully this sounds familiar, right? But you need to make sure that you're using appropriate and credible sources that are also helpful and appropriate for your particular topic. So this one assignment asks you to look at this article online. It's called Something Like a Reading Ethics, and it asks you to look at this because it offers 6 steps, and for this reflection, you need to, for 2 of the sources that you, and it's recommended but not required that you choose sources you plan on using as part of your tech report project, but it's much easier for you to use 2 sources that you plan on using as part of your sources for the technical report. But for at least 2 sources, you are going to complete the 6 recommended steps for engaging and evaluating sources. So, and those are down toward the bottom of the thing. It starts off with step 1, exigence, and each step, they're a little bit wordy, but read through them. They're not that difficult to read, but so the steps seem longer than what they are, but this author is just giving a lot of description and qualification as to what to do in the different steps. So you have step 1, exigence, and then step 2, response, step 3, terms and concepts, step 4, citations, step 5, questions, and then step 6 is your speculative response. So that's what you want to do for your reflection assignment this week. And I would, it doesn't say how to format it. So I was just thinking to myself, I don't write these assignments. These are written, all online courses are developed by Embry-Riddle, and then they are delivered by instructors. So I was just wondering myself what would be, I might just use a memo format, since that what you have been doing. It doesn't say explicitly to use that, so it's okay if you don't, but I'm just thinking for your own consistency, it might be easier to do that, but it's not required. And then the next assignment is the discussion memo, is where you select a tool or technology. And so this is getting into what you are going to be doing for your technical report, because the technical report is asking you to talk about a tool or technology. And this is where you create a memo, you compose a memo, about 150 words, in memo formatting, that describes the tool or technology that you want to research for the technical report project. And you want to identify the following elements in your memo. And I would use these as sections for your memo formatting. So I would have like section, right, the tool or technology, and then I, talk about that a little. Section, not your, but hypothetical organization of your tech report. This is kind of like a proposal, so to speak, of your tech report. It's really asking you to kind of, and not necessarily a proposal, but because it's not a formal proposal, but it's forcing you to do some pre-writing in terms of organizing what you're going to talk about, what the hypothetical organization for your tech report might look like, and then the hypothetical organization's goals. So that's asking you to consider the methodology of what you're doing. So why you're ordering it in a particular way. And again, it's recommended that you post this by the third day of the module week, and that was yesterday on Sunday. And for any discussions, you have those responses. So again, you're being asked to do 3 response posts, and each one should be the same length as they have been, 75 to 100 words. And for this particular response, you are offering a suggestion about what you want to know about that particular tool or tech, and then you can also offer instead or offer a helpful detail. So if you have a lot of experience or you have some information that might help one of your classmates with a tool or technology that they've chosen, you can do that. So you can either talk about, this is what I'd like to know about it, or here's, my experiences with it. Here's some things I have to share about that with you to help your classmates. So that's the discussion memo. So we have a reflection, a discussion memo, and then the early draft of your tech report. So if we look at the technical report, so it first gives you what you want to do for the final submission, and I'll talk about that in more detail when we get closer to the actual final submission. And you're essentially, for the early draft, you're essentially being asked to do kind of half of that work. So instead of 1,000 words, your early draft should be about 500. Instead of citing 6 sources, you're being asked to cite 3 sources. So you are doing just about half and a few things less, right? Like, you don't need to have the abstract for the final tech report that you do for the early draft. Your early draft should be, 500 words using, and I'm going to talk about in a second, using our textbooks or the informal report format. And they go through in the beginning of the chapter what kind of headings and organization is best for an informal report. But you won't keep the informal report organization completely intact for the final technical report. And then, of course, using information. So not only citing from the sources and integrating evidence into the early draft of the technical report, but also making sure you cite the sources in APA format. I would definitely encourage you to set up your paper in APA. One of the things that a lot of people forgot to do in the instruction manual final submission is to put their instruction manual in APA format. So even though it says maybe, should be 2 pages, you still need a cover page. That doesn't, the cover page does not count as a page, but you need that APA cover page. You need the APA format. I would just have that right away so you don't have to worry about it later. Otherwise, you're making more work for yourself. And I'm always about working smarter and not harder. So, and then there's a peer review of the early draft of the technical report. So this is going to function a little different, not different in terms of like actually giving the peer reviews. That stays the same, but it's going to function different because Module 6 is a 2-week module because it's broken out over the winter break at Embry-Riddle. So in terms of, so the tech report is going to feel like we're working on it for a long time because in essence it's 3 weeks. We're kind of addressing it because Module 6 is a 2-week module rather than a 1-week module. So you want to, and it gives you the due dates for everything down here. So you want to submit your technical report early draft at the end of this module. So this coming Thursday by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you'll submit that. And then after that, once that's submitted, you'll get assigned to do the peer review just like you did last time. And then you'll provide peer review for a classmate, and then you'll submit that final submission at the end of Module 6. So the peer review is due the 4th day of Module 6. So I'm just going to pull up a calendar here. I don't ever look at this calendar, so I don't know what's going to be on it. Okay. So in terms of when things are due, we are in December. I'm trying to figure out what day it is. Okay, it's the one that's in red. Today's the 17th. So the end of the module week is on the 20th. So on the 21st, you'll be assigned your peer reviews. And then you need to complete your peer reviews by the 4th day of Module 6. So this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So by the end of Monday the 24th, Christmas Eve, sorry, for those who celebrate Christmas. But that is when peer reviews are due. And along with peer review, you'll also get instructor feedback, just like you got on the instruction manual early draft. And then you have until the end of Module 6 to revise and submit your final. So the 20th is Module 5. No, I'm sorry, the 13th is Module 5. I'm just trying to make sure I got my dates right. And then the 14th started Module 5. The 21st will start Module 6. And it will end on now I'm confused by dates. Okay, numbers are not my strong point, so you're going to have to bear with me for just a second. And I have the dates the dates are listed here, right above the modules. So you can see that Module 6 runs 12/21 through 1/3. So if I go back to that calendar, right, so this was the beginning of the module we're in now on December 14th. Module 5 will end on the 20th. Module 6 begins on the 21st, and then it ends on the 3rd. So instead of ending on the 27th, it's going to end on the 3rd. So your finals, so the drafts are due by the 24th. That's the 4th day of the module. And then your final drafts are due the 3rd. So you have substantial time to complete the final submission of your technical report. In terms of what else you have to do, Module 6, there's, like here you have your final submissions. There's just these two other, this is a reminder that you have to complete the peer review. But you really don't have much else. So this is what we're kind of focusing on for the next few weeks because we're going to be crossing over winter break and things like that. So it's making our modules a little bit different for the time being. But that's the only module that's 2 weeks. Everything else is a week in this time. So I'm going to talk briefly about the informal report from the textbook. And if you've looked through chapter 8, it's full of examples. So Um, for the time being, this particular chapter can feel overwhelming because there's so many different types of technical reports. But for the time being, for the informal report for the early draft, we are just focusing on what our authors talk about in terms of the informal report. And I should say this is specific to the early draft. So in this chapter, and it's on page 160, at least in my textbook. Remember, I have the 4th edition of the textbook, so it might differ if you have the 3rd edition, but the information should be the same. So it gives you it really starts on the page before where it talks about informal report headings. So you want to look at that, and that's just kind of like the memo headings, but it's a little bit more. So, right, it has the date, to, from, subject, reference, action required, if there is an action required, and if you have a distribution list, which you may not. So the last two there, the action required and the distribution list, you might not have. And the textbook goes into detail about the informal report headings, but I'm not going to go over those. I'm going to go over the things that come off after the report headings. So the first part you have is the introduction. And the introduction is, and everything I'm going to say is going to sound slightly the same. There's a lot of similarities between a technical report and a research essay. It's just organized differently, and the way you write it is just a little bit different in terms of the tone you use and the language and the style of writing. That differs a little bit. But the introduction is no different than what you would do for an academic essay. So, what you plan on covering in the technical report. And why. So you want to make sure that you are kind of giving everything to your reader right up front. You don't want to, don't hold back information that the reader won't realize until they've read the report, right? You want to kind of show all your cards at the beginning, so to speak, like, this is what I've got. And it's just a note, but I encourage you to do it if it feels like it works for whatever tool or technology you're talking about. But integrating evidence into the introduction can be beneficial and build your own ethos. And I talked about ethos in my last video lecture, but it builds your own ethos as a writer and as a researcher, and in whatever hypothetical position you would be in if you were submitting this type of tech report for a particular job. So the introduction, like I said, it should kind of go over things that you already did, like an informal introduction for the instruction manual. This one is going to be more robust because it's a technical report. So it should, and it says in our text, right, that the introduction, I can't spell that word today. It should provide enough background information to ensure that all readers understand what follows. So just like with academic writing and research papers, same thing with tech reports, there's no mystery or whodunit involved in this type of writing. It's you've provided enough background information and enough context so that the reader understands from the introduction, okay, this is what I can anticipate in the rest of the technical report. So, and then the other elements that the text talks about in terms of what should go in there is it says a memo report introduction, which is a technical report is really like a much more developed memo. So the textbook is calling it a memo report introduction. and then it talks about it containing the following elements, and then it gives kind of like what's called the subject or report topic, and these would all go in the introduction. The report purpose, this is the why are you doing, like what's the objective of this particular report, the background and rationale, and then the report development. And, in terms of what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? So, and that's all an overview. So these are all, if we were to kind of break apart an introduction in terms of what the introduction is doing as a whole, these are kind of the different parts that would constitute the introduction, right? You start off by talking about your topic. You start off by talking about what its objective is and, why it needs to be talked about. You provide background or context and rationale. So this is why this is important. Like it serves some sort of purpose rather than the purpose of writing a tech report. And then here's how you, the reader, can anticipate this tech report to be development. And it's to, you want to, and our textbook says this, and it's important, especially with the report development part of the introduction, is it lets readers know what to expect and helps prevent surprise or disappointment. So you always want to keep the writer, or the reader with you at all times. So you do a lot of hand-holding as a writer, even in tech report writing, and that's no different from essay writing or academic writing. So that's the introduction. And then after the introduction, in the informal report format, you've got the summary section. And what our textbook says about that is that this part determines the success of reports. And they say this several times in this chapter, in chapter 8, is that readers of technical reports oftentimes will only read through like one section, or they might parse through like several sections, but they're not reading it word for word from the beginning to the end. And that's just because of the nature of the areas in which tech reports get written. As they're not essentially very long documents. They can be, but even at their longest, they're still not that long compared to other types of writing. But but our textbook, our authors say that our authors state that a lot of readers only read the introduction and the summary. And I think that's just because I feel like that's something that a lot of people do, not just in tech reports. Sometimes they'll just read the beginning points. I'm a seasoned reader, and it's not my favorite thing to do, but I always make it a point. I've stopped reading things in full probably about a good 10 years ago. I don't ever read anything in full, even when I'm in literature, unless I'm reading an actual literary text that I have to read in full in order to argue something about it. But besides that, if I'm reading secondary sources, I will read the intro, maybe the first body paragraph, and then the end. And I'll often parse through the center bit. So when I'm reading 40, 50 page secondary sources, when you do that for a living, you have to learn how to read in a smart, fast way. So, and like our authors say, a lot of readers only read the introduction and the summary. And that's just because that might be the only thing that people read, which is why the summary determines the success of many reports. And so the summary should tell your readers, and I'm reading directly from the textbook, it should tell your readers the essential points and findings in the report. So that's what the summary does. And it says, our textbook, our authors say that the informal reports might combine the introduction and summary into one paragraph. And so that's also something that you can do if you want, because if this is all the summary is doing based on the informal report, then I don't see why that can't go in the introduction because the introduction rhetorically would be doing the same thing. So the summary can be combined with the, introduction. All right. So the next part of the formal report is the discussion. And the discussion, this part develops each point. I just want to start that on a new line. That you state you will discuss. They have a dangling modifier in the textbook, so it's worded confusingly because they have develops each point that you state you will discuss in the introduction. So it's like I'm discussing it in the introduction, but the introduction in essence will already have been written. So bad writing on their part. But what they mean is that in your introduction, you will have talked about, what we call subpoints or subclaims that you're going to discuss in the report. And the discussion, it works like body paragraphs, except the discussion in this case is going to be one paragraph. But the discussion further develops the points or the subclaims that you said you were going to address in the introduction. So that's the purpose of the discussion. Okay. And then the part after the summary, after the discussion is the conclusion. And the conclusion does probably what you think it does. So it ties together what you have presented and states the main ideas you want readers to remember. So conclusion, there's different types of conclusion. This one is kind of a little bit of a summary, a wrapping up. Sometimes we call it a framing, where you might refer back to something that you talked about in the introduction by using the same type of language or, repeating words or ideas. And that creates a framing device, or like, for example, an imaginary rectangle around the whole technical report. So it feels like a nice wrapped package, nice and neat for your reader. So that's the conclusion part. And then there are some other parts to the informal report according to our authors. There's the recommendations. And this is if you need to recommend action. So, and what our textbook says, right, you would include that here. And sometimes if you've written in scientific document, or if you've written scientific work before, sometimes you have a section called limitations. And this is sort of the same as that, slightly different, but because limitations can suggest, where your study was limited, and so you justify that. But a limitation section can also say, because of these limitations, here are recommendations for future research or for future whatever. So if there's any type of things that you think would help with whatever tool or technology you're talking about, right? If you think it needs more, it should be implemented to a particular sector or a particular industry, or maybe people haven't thought of using the tool or technology with this type of thing, right? There's always types of recommendations that one can offer. And then the last section is the attachments. And this is if you have any supporting material or materials that you need to support your discussion or anything in your technical report. So it can, in our textbook, talks about that it might include like additional data, calculations. I'm not going to spell this right. And or it says, or previously written documents on the same subject, is to show that you've done your research as a writer and as a researcher. And it might include figures, if you have any figures or charts that you're talking about in the technical report. It also might include an appendix or appendices, and that's oftentimes how the attachments come. But I imagine the attachments part of the informal report might not be totally relevant for the early draft. You might find that you need to add attachments in the final submission for the technical reports. Okay, and there are some informal report examples in the textbook. So if you look through those, they're all a little bit different because they're meant to show technical reports working in different discursive contexts. So you can look at those as, models, but you want to make sure that you stick with the informal report format. And then also, I'm just going to give an APA reminder that you want to make sure that you also stay with the APA reminder. So it's not stated in the informal report, because normally when you would submit a technical report for a job, you wouldn't always, it depends on what your boss would be asking for or whoever would be asking for, but you normally wouldn't have to set it up in APA and provide a references page and that sort of thing. But because this is you're also in the discursive context of academia, you are asking to write in a particular writing style, which is APA. So after the attachments, you want to have the references page for APA. And so you want to have this after the early draft, where you cite your sources. And it's for the early draft, your 3 sources for the technical report, the early draft. So you want to make sure you have your references page after and the references page always starts on a new page. And so whenever you finish your technical report, go down to the next new page, and that's where you would have your references page. References usually come before attachments, but I'm guessing a lot of people won't, or nobody will have attachments for this document. But normally what you do is you have your references and then you have attachments. That's usually the order when you're doing a document like this. So that's for the technical report, the early draft, and following the informal report format as stated in our textbook and by our authors. So, but I also wanted to go through those dates with everybody in terms of when things are due. So, right, so you want to, I'm just going to restate it one more time. On the 20th is when you'll submit the technical report early draft, and then you want to complete your peer reviews by the 24th, by the end of the day, and then the final tech report is due on Thursday the 3rd, and that'll be when our module 6 is over. So I'm just reiterating that because we're going from 1-week modules to a 2-week module, and then after the 2-week module, we'll go back to 1-week modules for the remainder of the term. So that's all I've got today. I just wanted to go over what we're doing in Module 5 and just some anticipations for Module 6, especially since we have another peer review, and the peer review happens to slide over into a 2-week module. So, but the good news is you'll have a lot of time to work on revising your technical report. So otherwise, I hope everybody's week is starting out well. Feel free to contact me should you have any questions, and I will be talking with you guys soon. Okay, bye.